Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to What's Working, where we'll be sharing experiences of generative AI around teaching and assessment in a whole range of ways. Hopefully, it's still Monday, the 29th of May. Thank you all for making the time to be here. I know it's, as always, a busy time of semester. I hope it's treated you well so far. Press another button. My name's Dom McGrath. I'm the Teaching and Learning Manager within the Institute for Teaching and Learning Innovation, and it's my honour to introduce people today. And start with an acknowledgement of country. And so the University of Queensland acknowledges the traditional owners and their custodianship on the lands on which we gather. We pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connection to country. And we recognise their valuable contributions to Australian and global society. All right, so before I introduce our presenters, I'm going to say a couple of things around generative AI. First of all, what is ChatGPT? Again, it feels in one hand that this is repeating things that are so obvious and so part of life. On the other hand, I keep reminding myself that this has been less than 6 months, that we've had the really powerful sides of ChatGPT, and that there's still a lot of people who haven't had that opportunity to explore this space as much as they'd like. So, and it's one of the one generative AI model that we're going to be talking about today. So ChatGPT itself is an intelligent chatbot created by OpenAI, a really interesting company that was set to look at things from an open perspective and has become a little bit more corporate over time. It has a really cool interface, which is dialogic, where you can chat with an artificial intelligence and get some really interesting responses. Ask it questions, it can ask you questions. The generative AI models all admit they make mistakes. Provide incorrect premises and ideas along the way. And there's been a lot of work to reject inappropriate requests. A really interesting space that we'll touch on a bit. If you'd like to know more, we have some links at the end and opportunities to engage deeper. One of the other things that I love about this slide, and I keep putting in, this photo was generated by Midjourney. So there was a prompt that generated this image. I believe Hassan was responsible for the actual generation. And this area, again, is leaping forward in incredible ways where you can create images, videos, all sorts of things based on prompts with AI tools. Okay, so some of the common uses on the screen at the moment, there's a whole range of really cool ways that people have been able to use these tools in their teaching. And students are discovering all sorts of interesting ways to use this in their learning activities as well, some of which I think are really awesome and fantastic and are producing great ways for the students to engage in their study. Some ways which I think are a little bit frightening and may not be the best use of these tools, but that's the way new technologies go. All right, so our agenda today. Hopefully you're feeling welcome. Hopefully you're excited to hear from people around what's happening. We have Nick Carra, who has an impressive title there and far more stories that we could add around some of the brilliant work he's done in teaching and learning, leading stuff around the university, and incredible research that I only get to catch glimpses of. But today, asking him to share more about what's happening with generative AI in his teaching. We have Hassan Khosravi, who I have the pleasure of working with here within the Institute for Teaching and Learning Innovation, Helena Block, and then finishing up with Ben Kasartha, who works within our UQX team. At the end, we have a few updates around other activities and a quick survey to ask for some feedback from you. We are recording the session, so if you'd like to turn off your camera, you're welcome to do so. If you'd like to keep it on, that's fine. We ask you to engage with chat throughout, and if you want to add questions, say things along the way, please feel free to unmute. We're asking presenters to keep a pretty tight introduction and overview of what they're doing. After that, there's an opportunity to ask questions and engage. All right, I think that is the administration done, the welcome done. Nick, are you ready for me to hand over to the far more interesting and exciting part of the day?
Sure, I'm happy. I just go for it from here, right, Dom?
Yeah, I'm going to stop sharing and go for it from here.
Okay, thank you. My name's Nick, as Dom said, and I don't have a slide. I'm just going to talk for a few minutes, but I'm always happy to share my screen. A lot of what I would talk about is much more visual. So I wanted to say a little bit about where I'm coming from when I'm thinking about generative AI, and then some of the ways in which these models have begun to show up in teaching in my classroom over the last few years. And I guess I'm coming at it slightly differently because in my classes and courses, I want students to be able to understand these models. I want them to be able to understand what they're doing in our culture, the ways in which they're likely to transform our media system over the next decade or more. So I'm teaching within Media and Cultural Studies programs, Bachelor of Communication, the Media and Digital Cultures major, and the Bachelor of Arts. I'm going to be talking specifically about a third-year course I do called Media Platforms, which is a course where we think historically about how media platforms emerged over the last 2 or 3 decades. So and we really focus on the big platforms, the meta platforms, Alphabet, and so on, and the ways in which they've transformed our culture and where they're kind of going. And part of the argument that we're making in this course is to really think about this relationship between the very participatory dynamics on digital platforms. So if we're thinking about platforms like TikTok or Instagram, that we're documenting our lives in flows of images and video. This enables us to kind of express ourselves, interrelate with our peers, form social connections, cultural expression, and so on. But at the same time, it's a historical period in which platforms have developed the capacity to translate all of that expression into data. And we've kind of lived through a couple of decades now, which I think will be come to be understood historically as a training period, where the data that we generated about ourselves trained very large models that really transformed the media system. And so the second part, or the second aspect of what we're really studying, is the emergence of what we would call in our discipline an algorithmic culture. And an algorithmic culture is one where two things are at play, two fundamental things are at play. One is the kind of delegation of what was once thought of the work of culture, that is making decisions, judgments, recommendations, and so on about people, places, things, and objects, to machines. So a few decades ago, only a human could recommend a book or a song to another human, but now we have machines that can do that very well. And then the second part of an algorithmic culture is the part that's really interesting, which is as these algorithmic models begin to shape around us, we begin to change our practices of expression, not just to address other people, but to address the machines, the models that increasingly sort our culture. So in all sorts of ways, we have an algorithmic imaginary that we all have in our minds now when we're using digital media. And we're imagining not just how other people will receive what we have to say, but how a machine will classify it. So in my third-year course, we've been playing with generative models, I'd say for 2 or 3 years, going back to the early forms of ChatGPT 2 and 3, which have been out for a while now. We were certainly reading some of the early case studies, things like Project December, which was a dialogic chatbot built off GPT-2 and then 3. And it became kind of infamous or famous, I suppose, because people were able to train instances of bots with things like emails and text messages from deceased loved ones, and then build these very intimate bots where they could say chat with deceased partners and things like this. So we were kind of really exploring some of those bots in my course, and then particularly, I'm particularly interested mostly in images and visual models as well. And so we've been using since last year DALL-E 2 in my third-year course, so the text to image generative AI along with ChatGPT. I think about images and text together, and part of the reason I think that is because while ChatGPT has been something that's really kind of captured the imagination this year, we're likely to see over the next few years a kind of rapid convergence of generative AI. So already, say last week, or no, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago now, Meta released a prototype for a new model called ImageBind. And I think what's important conceptually about this model is that it collapses all media into one. So although ImageBind is a prototype at the moment, the concept is that you could feed any kind of medium in on one side, text, images, sound, video, temperature data, movement data, and it spit out any other kind of media on the other side. So you can transform, say, sound like a song into an image, or an image into text, or whatever. And I think this will be the kind of generative AI we'll have to rapidly adapt to, so that we won't be sort of thinking in a few years like, here's the text generative AI, there's the image one. These will be very multimodal models and interfaces. So in my class, what we do, just how many minutes in am I, Dom? How many of my 4 minutes have I used at this point?
You're about 5 minutes in. We have
okay.
5 minutes left, including questions. So there's a few more things I want to throw
so
at
I'm
us.
just going to quickly tell you what I do in class. So with images, I start off by giving my students a huge pile of images. I give them about 500 images that are from an Instagram feed, from a music festival or a particular aspect of Instagram. And I ask them to sort the images. Can you sort these images and make some kind of visual sense of them? Then I show them a visualization of those images as clustered by an unsupervised neural network. And that enables us to have all sorts of discussions about the ways in which a machine vision network clusters and organizes our visual culture and the differences between the way humans and machines do it. And then I get them to take some of those clusters of images and describe them to a generative model like DALL-E. And we examine the capacity of the model to then produce synthetic images that match some of our own visual practices. And what we find is that it's really good at doing some things and really bad at doing other things. We also find that it has all of these kind of prehistories in it. So for example, if you type plaits, you get images of white women. If you type braids, you get images of people of color. We find that the model is really good at creating images of young women, but not very good at creating images of young men. And there's important kind of social histories that work there that we can reflect on. And then in terms of assessment, I get students to kind of write critically and reflectively about these practices of classification and synthesis, reflect on their own practices, examine what the model is doing here in the background to both cluster and create forms of culture. I'll leave it there. There's some of the things we're doing in generative AI in the course.
Thank you so much, Nick. Appreciate the insights. That's really valuable additions to the way I think we're all engaging now with that algorithmic, imaginary and algorithmic cultures. It's sort of, I feel almost invading what we're doing as much as we're exploring what it does. Can I invite anyone who'd like to ask a question to please throw things into chat or put a hand up? Can I ask, Nick, one thing that sort of struck me in the last 6 months, I feel like this has sped up in a kind of extraordinary way that, it has been going for many years. The, generative AI, as you said, has been around for a range of time. And maybe it's my imagining that in the last 6 months, this feels like it's gone from something that's progressing as a technology has to a curve that's surprised me and many others. With your experience of looking at this, can you give me a comment on that sort of speed and how people are responding to it, or how you're responding in your teaching, or how it's changed this semester to previous semesters when you've been working in this space?
Yeah, I think two changes have happened. One is we're on this kind of rapid curve over the last decade. So the neural network kind of breakthroughs of sort of 15 to 20 years ago sped everything up. And so then the parameters of these generative models, from ChatGPT 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, just the exponential growth in the processing power of the models. And that's a combination of, the amount of data that we've put onto the web in the last couple of decades and major advances in the hardware processing capacity and so on. But I think in the last year, what's really interesting, or what's really felt like a consequential change, is the movement of companies like OpenAI and Midjourney to offering these models as very lightweight, accessible interfaces that anyone can log on to and use. And what's driving that is not just the technical advances in the model, but venture capital looking for the next wave of growth in the platform economy. And so a real sense that you're getting toward the end of the enormous growth you could get out of advertising dominated social media, and venture capital looking now for the next wave of growth. And it's this classic move fast and break things maneuver here, where you make the model open as an interface and see what happens and see who can figure out how to make money out of it. And so we're kind of dealing in all sorts of ways with the consequence of that move to offer it as a consumer interface, rather than not just the advances in the model itself, if you like.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to hassle people again. Oh, Karen.
I was going to say, Nick, I'm just fascinated. So that's a third year course that you were teaching into. Mm-hmm. How prepared were your students when they arrived to kind of work in this space? And so, because you were saying you were teaching that last year, so like a full. Yeah. So I'm just interested in how the students responded in that particular space, and particularly around that reflection model and the assessment.
It takes us a while to build up to it. So we do it over a couple of weeks. And I'm really beginning them by saying, you know, like when I give them a big pile of images, we're starting with a more basic question. How do we sort and organize our culture as people? And then how do machines do it? Because a generative model is built on the capacity of machines first to be able to classify and cluster our visual culture. It's that engine that kind of enables the next engine, which can synthesize new kinds of imagery. So it's like, we're stepping them through one by one. Firstly, how do we do it? How did machines learn to do it in supervised and then unsupervised ways? How do those unsupervised ways set the scene for these generative models? And so by the time then we're playing with the generative model, they've kind of got that sequence in mind. I find they're pretty, because particularly by last year, they were encountering a lot of this generative content in their own social media feeds, like TikTok is full of it. So I think a lot of it was already quite familiar. And the other thing we get them to do in this course is to build augmented reality filters as a kind of critical making exercise. So to create AR filters do it on Instagram's platform. But again, a lot of those filters now are using generative AI in the way the filters function. So they're kind of, I'm getting them to encounter it through their everyday media practices, through their everyday cultural experiences. And that seems to get it to work on the ground a little bit for them. Yeah.
So, which is a hallmark of your courses anyway, having worked with you and other courses as well, you scaffold your learners through the process, basically. Cool.
Right. And often starting with a practice that they're familiar with, and then trying to elaborate it historically, elaborate it technically, kind of build around it. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you.
Nick, I have to say thank you, and I think move on to Hassan, who's our next presenter. As always, thank you so much for your insights and sharing what you've been doing in your teaching. And can I introduce Hassan?
Thank you so much, Dom. Can I just check you can see my screen? Perfect. Okay, let me start this. Thank you, Dom, for the invitation, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to be talking for a few minutes about the project that I've been working on and use of AI assistance in creating and evaluating novel educational content. For the past few years, I've been developing an educational platform here as UQ. It's called the Ripple Learning Platform, where at its core, we partner with students in terms of creating educational content. I'll have a few examples of what that looks like in a second. But that content, bite-sized learning, if you want to think about it, is then peer-reviewed by other students in the class in terms of its quality, whether it's going to be helpful for the learning of other students in the class. And then we evaluate it based on those peer reviews. If the resource is approved, it goes to this large repository of bite-sized learning resources that's shared within the classroom. If it's rejected, it'll go back to the author with some feedback. And once you've got this large repository of approved resources, there's various ways you can use it, but we've mostly been using it for adaptive learning. So we see if we can infer the ability of students across different topics of the course, and we give them harder questions on things where we think they've developed mastery, and easier things on aspects that we feel like they're still developing mastery. Now, obviously, AI and generative AI seems very exciting for the work that we've been doing as we get non-experts or experts in training students to create and evaluate content. And we've been thinking about how we can actually onboard Gen AI in order to help students in their creation and evaluation of content. So all of this essentially create, evaluate, and practice process is overseen by AI assistance and instructor oversight. And this creating content is particularly what I'm going to talk a little about today. Now, when I say create content, there's various resource types students can create. It could be a multiple choice or multi-answer question. It could be a worked example. It could be a hotspot that they have a diagram and they say where the hotspot is. But we currently have been mostly focusing on use of generative AI in assisting students in creating MCQs and multi-answer questions so far. So what we've done is we've taken GPT 3.5 and 4 API, and we've embedded it into our platform. We've developed it such that when students create a resource, this is, for example, a multiple choice student that the student would have created, before they submit the resource to be peer reviewed, they'll receive some AI feedback. The AI feedback is designed to give them a summary first in terms of This is what I think this resource is about. Some positive aspects about it. Good feedback starts with positive aspects, and then suggestions for improvements in terms of how the system thinks they can improve this resource before they submit it. Then the students are asked to determine how helpful they think this was. And at the top, we've got, some notion about this is in beta, and then AI can be wrong and use this with your own judgment around it. This has not gone into the platform or hasn't been lively used with the students as of yet. We're hoping to release it in semester 2 in a few weeks as we start semester 2. And we're still just making sure that we've got everything right before we release this to the students. Just a quick few things in terms of what we've learned so far. And again, recognizing that this hasn't gone to the students yet, but we've been testing it on various resources, student-generated resources that we've got to see what sort of feedback it provides. And what we can see is that the AI feedback is often very helpful, occasionally incorrect. And the fact that it's occasionally incorrect is, that we've always made sure that whenever we're using the AI within the platform, we mark it as AI feedback so that it's not mistaken that this is coming from a tutor or the teaching team, with some prompting around this is in beta version and use it with your own judgment. However, I would say, based on our initial look at it, I think up to 90% of the time, we find that the feedback that's being provided is really helpful. We've also been going back and forth in terms of exploring the balance between the pedagogy and the technology aspects. For example, when we've got the suggested improvements here, we can actually get GPT to give a full rewrite of what this resource should say. For example, a rewrite of what the options should be, a rewrite of what the actual explanations about each of the options should be. And we've been going back and forth, do we present this as a Socratic tutor that's just giving them high-level suggestions, or do we actually make it such that there is an improved version that they can copy paste? But at that point, they might be not reading it well, and they might be just copy pasting the suggestions. That may potentially lead to better resources being created, but we're still wondering if that actually leads to better learning or not. So I think in terms of balancing that pedagogy and technology, we need to do further exploration to see what's working and what's not. Writing good prompts is hard. And essentially, when you use AI-powered applications, like we are using AI in applications, it kind of relieves students from the burden of writing those prompts. So the prompts that we put to the platform to generate this is around a few paragraphs long. And, obviously, if you've got students which are not necessarily AI literate or good prompt engineers, it's often not as easy for them to get good feedback from a system if they're just using ChatGPT underneath. Maybe more broadly, large language models open up numerous possibilities for educational tools that we've never thought would be possible. If you're interested, I would encourage you to think about, what sort of things could happen and have a go in terms of thinking about what sort of tools could be created that can come out of UQ. And if you would like to use Ripple for your teaching or research for next semester or anywhere, we do have a team that looks over the email ripple@uq.edu.au. If you want to use it in your teaching, we'll be really looking forward to working with you and getting the Gen AI in particular, if that's of interest to you in your course, or if you want to use it around the research, trying to think about what this means in terms of student behavior, in terms of student outcomes. Again, we would really love to collaborate with you and think a little bit more about what's exciting to you. With that, the 6 minutes is just over, so I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Hassan. Really exciting work as always. Yeah, exactly. If anyone has questions they'd like to ask, please feel free to throw them into chat or turn on your microphones. Hassan, one of the things I wanted to talk about originally is, I think when I look at Ripple, that create, evaluate, assess model, I think having the students do each of those steps is where the learning happens. And I think there's so much that students learn through creation. And I think one of the fears of generative AI is that it can move students out of that creation and they can be using other systems to do that creation and lose the learning. I think the combination you're presenting of having Gen AI support and challenge what students are doing, I think is really interesting. And that combination is, I think, really valuable. So I was going to follow that up with the question. I think there may be getting better one. Can you see other ways we can work there? Is that a focus of your work to try and see about that combination of where students and AI can work together to learn rather than one being replaced with the other?
Yeah, and that collaboration and interfaces and the scaffolding that allows for that collaboration to happen is fascinating to me. And again, we were thinking about, does this need to be a chat conversation? Perhaps not. Then it might be looking too similar like ChatGPT itself, and they might be thinking about just using it there. What would be the right sort of interface that we lead with pedagogy to give them good feedback, but not necessarily overtake the creation? So for example, initially we were thinking, actually, can we do the reverse? Can we get AI to create something and then the student to sort of enhance it? But we really thought that we want the novelty to still come from the student side and the human side. So I do think there's a lot that we need to think and explore about best ways of introducing collaborations between our students and AI. And it's early days, so it'd be lovely to see what's possible.
All right. So can I follow up with a question from Tanya? Then I'm going to jump to the one from Tim. So how do you see AI inaccuracies playing in this space? So there's some people I know who would say it's inaccurate, we shouldn't be putting it in front of our students. I've argued at times that sometimes those inaccuracies might be powerful in that students have to think more deeply about it.
Yeah, thanks, Tim, for the question. And that's been one of our main concerns, and that's why we're going quite conservatively in terms of how we develop it and with various points of risk and concern. This is being generated by AI. Use your own caution with it. There's also aspects of the resource. For example, it could be that the resource has an image that ChatGPT doesn't understand, or part of the explanation might be coming from an image. So there are inaccuracies, at least from what we've explored so far, looking at based around 100 or 150 resources created by students. Most of the time, we think it's better than what other students' peer feedback or tutor feedback that they will get. So in terms of what they generally get, we think it's better than most peer-reviewed or tutor reviews that they get. But yet there are inaccuracies, and what would be, I think we all need to think about how we bring this partnership in, considering that they're not always going to be correct. And if I'm all very open to suggestions as well, in terms of how we could manage those risks, if anyone has suggestions and ideas.
And then I'm going to follow up with a question that Tim's had around what prevents students from just opening up ChatGPT, putting in, write me a question about blah, and then copying and pasting that into Ripple.
Yeah, I mean, there's risks with any type of assessment that you've got, that students will use GPT to do those. I guess compared to many standard quizzes that you might have, where they put the question in and they'll just get the right answer for a multiple choice quiz, at least it requires a little bit more novelty, such that what you get coming from Gen AI without much prompting around it might not necessarily be a really good, highly effective resource that aligns with the content of the course. So you might not know what the content is, but that would again require some other ways of human AI collaboration to come up with something which is novel in terms of creating something that other reviewers would see, other peer reviewers would see as beneficial to student learning.
Tim, I see you've got your mic on. Did you want to say anything?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, I mean, the way I've been thinking about this is that it may be the case that, because people can generate new stuff, of varying quality easily, that the real benefit, at least for assessment, maybe even for learning in general, is in getting people to critically analyze what's produced and, and doing that in somehow, as much as possible, live format, if you really want people to understand and learn things rather than just collate information that's produced in various formats. So I guess I just wanted your perspective on that. And, I really struggle, like the creation part of it is a concern for me. Like that seems like, I can't think of a good way to really make sure that students will be creating, and that now there's an opportunity to have AI, produce something to start with, and maybe that's okay. Maybe that's the way the world is now, and maybe we just have to accept that. But if that's, have you thought about, ways that you can actually really encourage students to create?
Hassan, we're pushing time. Can I give you 20 seconds, and then I'm going to give Nick about 30 seconds, and then I'm going to hand over.
Sure. I guess the very short answer is that, I think there's similar concerns with most types of assessments that we currently have. If they're writing an essay, if they're writing a project, there are aspects of it that they can use. And redesigning assessment and rethinking assessment, at least in my mind, still getting them to create novel content, and then having various aspects of trying to see if it's actually coming from the student and examining what students have done is sort of what we were thinking about. But I agree that there's work that needs to be done to make sure that it's coming from student and not from AI.
Thanks, Hassan. Nick.
Just two quick a thought and a question, but responding to Tim, I think what you're saying really appeals to me, and and lines up with a discussion I've been having with colleagues in our faculty. In an interesting way, generative AI pushes the emphasis, and this is a very humanities way to thing to say, but it pushes the emphasis back to the critical practices of reading and making sense more than where a lot of our pedagogy has gone over the last generation, which is toward writing in particular genres, and so a lot of what we probably need to kind of return to, in a sense, is these critical practices of making sense of something, a cultural object, a text, and so on. And I think that's a really it sort of changes, I suppose, how we might approach assessment overall. Hassan, I just had a question, I suppose, about the accuracy and whether we expect over time that we'd say within a university context or a disciplinary context be able to run a local instance of something like ChatGPT, confined to data that we know, is correct in a disciplinary sense, and whether you're aware of how close we might be to be able to run instances like that.
Really great questions. I'll keep it short, and maybe I'll be very happy to have an offline discussion, Tim, with Nick and either of you. In terms of writing local versions, we're currently running local versions in the ITEE school on other applications, and we have been thinking about that, and in terms of what other resources and material we've got to train it on actually disciplinary material. So that is one thing we've got in mind. It's not any cheaper though, and it still requires quite a bit of GPT, CPU and GPU power in order to run it. I forgot what the first part, in terms of how accurate it is. I mean, we're trying to capture as much data and information that we can in terms of students' perceptions of its quality, how good they thought it was or how accurate they thought it was, and sort of writing from students so that we have a better sense after running it for a semester in terms of perceptions from humans and its value for the students.
Hassan, thank you so much for your insights and your responses and your work in this space. I really appreciate it. I have to keep moving. It's a brisk day where we tease ideas and keep moving forward. Eleanor, can I introduce you to everyone and invite you to share your screen if you so wish and talk about your work?
Without further ado, I am a very mature academic who says the sense of urgency and I'm very open, but also very critical like Nick. And I am a very good friends with critical reasoning, critical thinking techniques, and also we need to make sense of things. ChatGPT and all the AI are not knowledge models. They are learning language. What it is? Language models, not knowledge models. And this I have heard in workshops, in seminars, and also in what I have read about it, is language models, not knowledge models. So we need to know that we don't create new knowledge. They mobilize, I don't know if I'm mistaken, Nick, but they mobilize the knowledge that exists. So I will start. What I have tried. I was very scared at the beginning of this semester with all the ChatGPT hype. So I ran to Chris Frost, what are we going to do? what is to be done? So this was a case study applying communication theory to a client. This is public relations, communication, strategic communication, to a client's communication need or problem or issue. So the format that I selected is that they couldn't use ChatGPT or AI or anything. And but of course, it's that sense of urgency and curiosity and nervousness on our side pedagogically. I want to find that balance that Hassan was talking about pedagogically, but also with the technology. Results. 0% ChatGPT in this assignment. The difference with a person who obtained 1% AI, 100% AI was immense. So this student demonstrated knowledge, understanding, engagement, and critical thinking, showcase the graph below with 3 theories, that applied, perfectly well to 3 theories that applied to the case. The client was Rise Up about domestic violence, and they want to engage Gen Z volunteers. So this is a specific case, Gen Z volunteers. How will we communicate with Gen Z to become volunteers for Rise Up? So he studied theories, he saw the ways to engage with Gen Z, and he applied this little map with 3 theories to engage with Gen Z. A person who used 100% ChatGPT, so the result is very clinical, is very neutral. What the machine used for the student, I think, although we cannot prove it or mention it, is something very neutral about the past case that Rise Up had on the web. So in reality, the student didn't respond to the brief. He didn't produce any answer to the brief. The resources that they mentioned in text and the reference list didn't really exist because they mentioned Gregory, which is one of the textbooks, and Gregory doesn't talk about theories, etc. So the result was not good. Could have been something like very neutral about the past thing. Might have passed, maybe, but it's not good enough. Or is this good enough for us and for them? And that's my question, pedagogically. So what I see is that the machine, sequences of work, but it doesn't produce knowledge. It doesn't link complex ideas. And normally my assignments are authentic. I involve real life clients, theory, practice, and they have to make sense and click. So no, this is all ChatGPT, and it's all neutral. So what happens is what worked. How am I going for time? I don't know. So
you've got about 2 minutes left.
Okay. So what is my solution? Authentic assessment? Yes. All the way with authentic assessment, with things that are connected with real life, whatever they are. I also did, for instance, mind maps for political communication. This is about populism. They needed to present examples of populists and how they work. So you can see this team, it was a group, pairs in couples. So Boris Johnson, Taro Yamamoto in Japan, and they sort of got the idea of what populism is and how they communicate. So this was all 0%, etc. So what I could do differently? Well, as I said, ChatGPT and other AI are language models, not knowledge models. They predict sequences of work, not knowledge. They might help students. For instance, applying some of the UNESCO activities, and I don't know if you have seen that document about how to teach with this. First, in my view, we could ask the students to create a draft and use ChatGPT and bring it to tutorials, assessing in class critically, and then, annotate and then produce an assignment critically annotated where they see the problems of ChatGPT, and then presenting a good one with their knowledge based on what their research, etc. So, and compare. So other Socratic component, prepping for discussions, or collaborative coach, also proposed by UNESCO. The risk a student can get used to this and to simplifying, oversimplifying complex problems. These are some of the mind maps, critical thinking, critical reasoning that my students have applied about different projects in political communication and policy. This is policy about vapes, This is government communication in Singapore. This is building and influencing policy and lobbying. And, you know, you can see they make sense. They started thinking and they didn't apply 0% AI to my knowledge. They might, but this is what Turnitin captured. So this is all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. Appreciate the insights and all the work happening in this space. I have, I think, time for one question, and no one else has jumped into chat, so I might take the moment. You mentioned that at first glance, the work looks good. And I think that's one of the things that I've noticed with a lot of these is that first glance, it's really hard to tell, you know, the work of a generative AI tool from a human tool, but it's that depth that's hard. Do you have any advice around getting past that first glance quickly? Because I know everyone has such time pressure that sometimes going deeper is really hard to make the time for.
For example, this is done all by ChatGPT, all of it. And you can see, for instance, that they deal with the problem in general, broadly. Domestic violence, the social problem, but not the how to communicate and get Gen Z volunteers, which was in reality the task. So you have to read more carefully, read triple, ask your tutors to read triple too, and also check the references, check all the things they use, the material they use from theory, from the practices, etc. That's the only advice so far. That is more work for us and for our tutors. But happy to use it critically. I don't mind, but from the beginning, working with the students, for the students to think critically what they can do with ChatGPT or others, and what they cannot do. That is, I think, the best pedagogical thing I am thinking at the moment.
Thank you so much, Elena. I'm going to have to keep moving because we're pushing time today. I really appreciate everything you've shared and looking forward to seeing more. I'm going to introduce Ben Kosolta from UQX team, and I'm just going to share my screen so that he can see his slides. Ben.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ben's Show and Tell. Some of you have seen me present about this before, but I've got a couple of new bits that I can add. So even if you have seen me talk about Synthesia, I'm hoping that I can add something a little bit extra on top of that today. I'm a learning designer with UQX, which means I build courses for UQ students and for the world. And so we like to experiment with different things and see what works and what doesn't. One of the tools that I've used in the last year is generative AI for video. So a lot of discussion around generative AI at the moment is to do with images and text. This is a platform, I guess, that allows you to develop videos using AI technology. So what we did was we added some synthetic videos to a course on business statistics that we were building. These videos have a very realistic looking avatar. You can see one in the image there. You choose the avatar that you want. So you pick what face you want learners to see, and you pick the voice. So you can pick English in a variety of accents, or you can pick many other languages as well. We used Synthesia, which is a subscription-based web service. It costs us to do this experiment only cost about $30 per month, which gives about 10 minutes of video, which doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're making 2 short 5-minute videos, that's about 1 every 2 weeks. So, and then you can just cancel this subscription rather whenever you like. So it wasn't an expensive endeavor or experiment for us. We put several tutorial videos throughout the course on how to use Excel. So this is a statistics course. The lecturer provides studio videos. This is the mathematical principles. And then these synthetic videos are separate to that. This is how you do this particular type of mathematical problem in Excel. So I figured that getting a senior lecturer to come in and film pen videos on how to do X, Y, or Z in Excel is not a cost-effective use of their time. It's expensive from a number of points of view, but particularly because you have to have cameras, you have to have equipment, you have to have media team, you have to have post-production, various other things, whereas these are not so resource heavy.
So yeah, we've been able to incorporate those into the course in a very smooth way. And we've made sure that they are used to supplement the academic's voice and not to try and replace the academic. So this is like a tutor that sort of sits off to the side, and the academic's voice remains prominent in the course. Next slide, please. So that's, whoops, we've skipped one. So what did we learn through doing this process? Well, Synthesia is actually very easy to use. It's set out like PowerPoint. It's updated quite a lot. In one of their most recent updates, you can get ChatGPT to write the storyboard for you. And so you can just say, give me a video about this with these sections and so on, and it will actually generate that for you. So that makes it even easier again. But ultimately, it makes video production a one-person job because you don't need a studio. You don't need a camera. You literally sit in front of a computer, put your script in, pick what you want it to look like, pick some backgrounds and animations if you want, and push generate video, and then you have your video. It adds another voice to the course as well. So in addition to your academic voice, you also have a second voice, which you sometimes can have difficulty in finding. If you just want someone to do a little job, you kind of, that can be a little bit difficult to obtain a person to do that. After letting the course run for a while, so these videos have been up for a good, probably half a year to a year, we got learners to rate them. So you can see on the screen here at the top is Temeskin, our course academic, and they rated his videos an average of 4.8 out of 5. We also got them to rate the synthetic videos with the synthetic avatar, and they rated them basically the same. So initial concerns about people won't like the fact that it's not a real person, people are uncomfortable with this. When you actually ask the learners and you actually put it in place, learners are just as happy to have these videos as they are a real person. So that was really good validation to give an indication that we're sort of on the right track and using it in an appropriate way that learners either don't mind or that they actually like. Last slide, please. What did we learn? Sorry, what would we do differently? Basically, not much. This worked really well. The videos are very crisp. They're great quality. I'm going to put a link in the chat so that you can watch one yourself. If you've never seen an educational video, you might have seen deepfake videos on YouTube, but have you ever actually watched a synthetic video that's designed for a tertiary audience? If not, this is the first day that you will ever do that. So I'll pop that link in the chat as soon as we're done, and you can watch it yourself. But I would encourage you to ask yourself the question while you're watching it, at what point do I forget that I'm listening to a real person? Because it's really convincing, and the illusion kind of increases with time. So you get to about the 30-second mark and you start to forget that this is not a real human being talking to you, which is kind of nice. The only thing that I would do differently, and you can see a screenshot of the platform here and the way it's set up, is that I would use more native features of the platform. So the platform is being constantly updated, and it's quite powerful now. You can see down the left-hand side of the screenshot, it's set up like PowerPoint. So you've got your different scenes down the left. You've got your storyboard across the bottom. What you're looking at the center of the screen there is screen recording. So you can screen record natively in the platform without using another platform to do that. And then down the right-hand side, you've got all your animations and anything like that that you want to include. It'll allow you to dump in stock footage from Pexels directly from the platform. So a lot of integration has happened in there, and I would do that a lot more rather than trying to do things in post. I'll pop that link for you now in the chat. There it is. And yeah, happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Ben. I think that link went straight to me rather than to everyone. So do you mind putting that in again while I look at another question? So one of the things that I've been amazed watching this work is my reaction, which I imagine many other people's reaction in this place was, this doesn't feel like the right way to go with generative AI, and replacing parts of my work with a generative AI tool feels a little odd to start with. And you very quickly took me on a journey to where I went, actually, here's really cool and effective places where we can use this work and these approaches that add value without taking anything from the work that I like doing away from me. Can you, have you worked on, how did you go with that conversation with the first time you worked through this proposal and with other people, and what's the reactions have you seen?
Yeah, at first, most people are like, oh, it's so realistic. And that kind of distracts from what you're doing, because people are sort of enamored with the technology at first, and then kind of sometimes they're a little bit uncomfortable because it's so realistic. And you kind of want to go, oh, hang on, I'm not sure I'm ready for this because I've never had to think about this before. However, once I think you go over that initial hurdle and go, okay, this is unusual, but I'm used to it now. And then go, how can this be used to help students learn? And how does it help us to build courses in a more cost-effective way without taking away like students are paying $20,000 to do a course at UQ. They want to hear from someone who's qualified. The academic needs to be the prominent voice in the course. But looking at it, okay, how can we use this for supplemental material, I think is a good place to put it. And it, really helps students to learn without taxing the lecturer with things that would take up a lot of their time, like supplemental video production.
Thanks, Ben. Amber.
Amazing, thank you. My similar comments to Dom, so thanks for sharing, Ben. I have a question and a comment, apologies. I couldn't help but notice that the avatar was a white young man. So I'm curious about how your team, the design team, as well as the platform is enabling or ensuring that we're not continuing to reinforce current stereotypes, particularly in STEM, obviously, but across the board. I'm sure you're thinking about that, but I'm curious about how you've gone about that.
Yes, so our lecturer is from Ethiopia, and so I wanted a little bit of a contrast there as one point of difference. We've also got study buddies, which are filmed study sessions with students in the course, and we've got some racial diversity there as well. So across the course, if you look at the course more broadly, it does have that diversity. But yes, you can choose in this platform from about 60 or 70 different avatars, and this is just one that I went with. So yeah, across the course there is that diversity, but yes, it is something that we're mindful of.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you both. There was a request for, oh yeah, there it is. Things happening in the chat. I'm going to wrap up now because we're, again, pushing time. I always get wrapped up in these conversations and there's always more you could do. So Ben, thank you again for both the work and for sharing today. Really quickly to finish up, there is a feedback form we posted in chat. Some of it's around your use of generative AI, some of it's around what we should be doing with these sessions and where we can take them from here. We have a range of resources on the Italy website that we'll continue to update. We'll have some hopefully interesting things there leading into semester 2, but we're trying to keep things as stable as we can because we know everything else is moving so quickly. We have some more getting started with generative AI workshops coming up. So if you haven't had a chance to jump in and explore these tools yourself and would like to do that with some support around you, the link will be shared afterwards and it's in the slides that I can't quite click on, but it's on the Italy website under events. And if you know someone else who is looking at this space but hasn't got started, that's a great place to go. If you have pushed things and you want to come along to a masterclass, we've just agreed with Jason Tangent for him to run a masterclass in this space coming up in around the 15th of June. The registration of that will go live in the next couple of days. Jason is doing incredible things, creating chatbots to work directly with students, as well as drawing a whole heap of amazing uses out of these new tools. And then we'll have some more things coming up in Ready to Teach with the agenda for that one coming out early next week. So thank you all for your time today. I hope you found it as intriguing and enjoyable as I have to listen to what everyone's been doing and to share practices, and look forward to catching up with you again at the next opportunity. And again, particularly thank you to Eleanor, Nick, Ben, and Hassan for sharing their work.